Control Alt E. Got it. Okay, so we left off on visualizing the existing profiles. We're just getting ready to cut some existing cross sections. So here's what you need to do. In ProjectWise, go to a file called GeoLines. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to put microstation lines out wherever you want to cut a cross section, which is generally like 50-foot increments on even stations. And then once we get that, we're going to go back and add any, incremental, any additional cross sections that you need, such as at culverts, at entrances, side roads, and anywhere else you want to cut a cross section. Okay, so I'm going to reference in the alignment and the design file and the topo file. Okay, so we have a tool, even though we're going to be placing just simple microstation elements. They have no special tags, they're just dumb microstation elements. Even though we're placing those, we still have a Geopak tool that assists us in placing those. Instead of having to go out and go perpendicular from the alignment and all that sort of thing. So we're going to use Geopak to place the pattern lines, but it's simply to help us draft. That's all it does for us. And so I'm going to go here where my cross-section tools are. I'm going to select Draw Patterns by a Station Range. And I'm going to say use the mainline chain. Just like everything else we do, beginning and ending stationing. We don't have any station equations, but if we do, this would take into account those station equations. Now we're probably going to want to start off on a nice even station. We don't worry about the ending station so much. And then we got a couple choices here. First, we're going to start off with increment of 50 foot. And then in this area, we're going to tell it what level to use. And so all the way at the bottom of your levels, you've got these levels that start off with XS and XSC. So here are the pattern line levels. There's one for the main line right there, and then we can just use by level for the rest of the attributes. Sometimes you'll play around with different offsets. Not too critical. 100 foot by default would be fine, I think. And so there's some cross sections maybe. I don't know that we're going to go quite that far. So I could even go back after the fact and say, well, I really didn't need those, and hit delete. Then I might go into a situation like this and say, well, I would rather that cross section be at the culvert, not at that even station. So I could either keep that cross section, or if it's really, really close, I probably wouldn't have two that close. This is personal preference probably. I would probably just pick up that one, and I would snap to the center here. And so you might use like a midpoint snap right there. That would be fine. And then looking here, mostly our cross sections are just straight cross sections, but occasionally we have a need to do something a little bit differently. And because we know the swale in this field kind of cuts across at an angle, I'm going to go ahead and run a cross section down the middle, because from a field check a long time ago, I had noticed that it looked to me like elevation wise we might need to do some grading out in that swale. And so I can, even though I use this tool here, remember these are just microstation elements. So I'm going to match up my attributes. I'm going to go back and I'm going to say I would rather the cross section look kind of like that. But now that needs to be a line string. Right now it's two separate lines. So I could come over here and say place smart line like there, there, and there. And then I can just delete that line that's underneath it. Yeah. So now that's, see, X is 1. Probably would have been good on this class example if we would have had an entrance. I need to add one at some point. I'll think about that later. Maybe if I ever do this again, or maybe if we have time later, I'll add a cross section later for an entrance. But just for training, this job didn't really have one, but for training purposes, probably would have been good to throw a field entrance out there. Okay, now I'm going to look at my side road. Depending on what's happening with the side road, I may or may not want a cross section right at the side road. I would say if I was not doing some major intersection improvement work to where I'm already going to have a profile, I'm going to have plenty of information at this intersection. So I really don't need an extra cross section right at the middle. If we weren't doing that, you would typically want, a cross section right down the middle of the side road. So I'm going to look at this and say, do I want these cross sections? Do I need them? Are they in a good location? Are they going to do anything for me at that location? I might either keep them, or I think what I would probably do, again, this is nothing exact here, a little bit of a personal preference. I'd probably like to have one like closer to like the invert of the culvert. I think that would be more valuable to me. You could decide as a designer, depending on what your scope of work is here and what makes most sense to you. What do you think is going to benefit construction? What's going to benefit you the most in design, but then also what's going to benefit construction the most? How can you present the information to construction where it's going to give them the most value also? So, some of these things, as far as where cross sections are located, it's definitely not totally black and white. But generally speaking, 50 foot on center, even stations, entrances, side roads, culverts, that sort of thing. Okay, so I think we're ready to go. And so let's try to decide here. Maybe we'll go ahead and set up cross sections for the side road too and just be done with it. Before I generate the existing cross sections, let's do pattern lines we're going to need pattern lines for the side road also. So let's change our chain name to 17. You put these need to be on a different level. Pattern lines cannot cross one another, for one. And when you process, you're going to need to process them separately. So you're definitely going to need the side road to be on the side road pattern lines need to be on a different level. So I think there's one for side road somewhere right there. And we'll just use a different color. Say OK. And let's see. It'll start back here somewhere. Maybe we'll say at 8 to somewhere around here. Probably go with less, like 25 foot increments to get started. We'll see what that gives us. And then we'll decide if that's too many or what we want to do. So we got a few cross sections out. It's good to get a couple cross sections beyond the proposed because you're going to be looking at drainage and you're going to want the ditch elevation, make sure that the drainage can tie in. Okay, so probably good to go a little bit beyond the proposed. That's probably okay. It might be a few too many cross sections. I don't know. Judgment call on the spacing, but not too bad. But we are going to want one. If I didn't already know, actually I probably still would cut one. Let me go ahead and cut one both at the existing and the proposed. Because it depends on what you're doing with the existing. You would probably go ahead and cut one at the existing. Now, when it's time to build this, you're probably going to make the choice. You're going to do two things with the existing culvert if you're going to abandon it. You're either going to remove it or you're going to fill it with flowable fill, like a mortar mix, the CLSM they call it, right? Controlled, low strength material, or what's that stand for? CLSM?
That's right.
Yeah, it's like a mortar mix, and they're just going to plug the ends and fill it full and just leave it in place. Now, in this particular case, I would say probably because we've got the proposed so close to the existing, we'd probably go ahead and just remove the existing. But if the proposed culvert was way far away from it, and we didn't want it, it'd be a lot more work to excavate out that existing culvert. In many cases, we would probably choose to just leave it there if it's not hurting anything, and we would just fill it. A lot of variables, It's not really a CAD issue so much as a design issue, I suppose. Okay, so I'm going to take that pattern line, use midpoint snap again, get one at the proposed, and then we said we'll go ahead and get one at the existing. Same with this side. And it looks like the existing's not exactly perpendicular. So I guess one thing I didn't mention is that normally you go with a pattern line that's perpendicular to the alignment, but it doesn't have to be that way. You can have a skewed culvert, and in that case, you can just use regular microstation commands. Oops, let's delete that. Yeah. And I'll just snap to the surveyed center of the culvert. And we had one more. And I'm just going to throw it somewhere close to the middle. I usually do like I did on their side. They'll put a line out or something, give you something to just snap to the midpoint to get it exact. All right. So we are ready to cut some cross sections. Now, existing is a little bit different than proposed. Existing, on all these dialogues, you're going to deal with a lot of dialogues. And the way that they work is if they ask you what file that you want something placed into, then you can be sitting in any file and it'll take you to that file. But if it doesn't ask you that question, then you need to be sitting in that file, if that makes sense. And so in the case of existing cross sections, this is the dialog, and it's not going to ask you what file do you want to place the existing cross sections in. So you need to be sitting in that file when you run this. At the same time, you want to be able to not have to memorize what level you put your pattern lines on. So it's nice to be sitting here, or at least have this referenced. So here's the information about existing cross sections. There's 2 tabs. I need to first fill out the first one. And you got a couple choices, and we use this by design option. That's the pattern line option. That says, in order for us to tell it where we want the, like, you don't have to have pattern lines. I could have just said, give me a cross section every 50 feet, but then that wouldn't have helped me out with those intermediate cross sections. So it's almost always better to place pattern lines. Also for later when you go back, just to know where you cut that cross section, having pattern lines is very nice, but you need to use this DGN option. Okay, so I'm going to path out to where that file is located. And then this became, it was grayed out, now it's available. So I'm going to reset. And rather than checking to see what level that's on and then coming over here and selecting it, it's much easier, and you're less likely to make mistakes. If you hit reset, hit match, and just match it, and then it's a done deal. And then it's asking here, okay, I'm looking for lines. Am I looking for line strings also? In this case, the answer is yes, because we made a line string for the culvert. So I'm going to toggle that also. Now the scale, now this is just a ratio. So you could say 10 and 5 or 10 and 1, or it doesn't really matter. You're exaggerating. We want to exaggerate the cross sections by 2 in the y-axis. So whatever you want to key in for a ratio. I'll say 2 and 1, 10 and 5, same thing. We've got that. Now I'm going to switch to surfaces. Again, I want to point to that same 10 file I've been pointing to all along. It's in the surveys folder. Yeah, there it is. And then I drop down here. And this setting looks like the profile setting. So it can be confusing. The whole dialog looks like the profile, but this is cross sections, and this is something that's a little different than profile. Remember profile, we said by feature, and we use that mini DNC manager. Well, for cross sections, we use by level symbology. And then we click into black, and we just tell it, use the cross section level, the existing ground, by level, by level, by level. And then when it draws the existing cross section elements, do you want them to be segmented lines, or do you want it to be one whole line string? I don't know. I haven't really found a big difference there. So I just use line. Do you want it to place an existing elevation at the center line? I don't normally do that, but you can if you want. And I think we're ready to go. So what you do, this is populated now, so you need to add it up into this box. But unlike profile, nothing happened, right? When I added it up here, I have to hit the draw button for it to actually process. So, and in order to do that, I want to be sitting in my cross sections file. So back in the design folder, there's a file called cross section. What did I do? Mainline, I think. There's 2. There's one that says SR, and there's one that says mainline. So I'm going to select mainline. Opens up this blank file.
So that dialog box stays open then?
Yep. And I just hit draw. No patterns were found. Huh. Okay. So we got to figure out what the problem is. It didn't find anything. So let's see what. Oh, there it is. The chain. Yeah. Oh, and that's okay. I'm going to reference in rather than go back in it. That GeoLines file. Okay, so I'm going to point to it here. And I'm going to do the same thing. Reset, match, select it there, add line string. Just doing the same thing I just did. That's good. And this is still filled out the way we filled it out. I add it, and this time it should work. It says some patterns are either outside or partially or wholly, fully. That's okay. We'll say okay. And we have existing cross sections. And we can view those either with the cross-section navigator, which is right there. And it brings up, this is the cross-section navigator. Now this version's nice, it does a lot of things, but one thing it does not do is sync up with the plan view. So we'll review sections based on both navigator and active chain control. If I zoom out, I see it placed a bunch of cross sections in the file, and it did just like it did with the profile. It placed a cell. So it's the cell that gives it, its intelligence. And so when I hit this middle reset button, it takes me to the very first cross section. And it knows things about this cross section. See across the top says scale 2 to 1. So it knows that the y-axis is exaggerated by 2. If I was to use some of these other drawing tools over here, I don't have to tell it, take into account the fact that I exaggerated the cross section. I can say, plot me a forest slope at 1 to 4, and it automatically takes that into account for me, which is pretty nice. So see, I can say rise over run, run 4, rise 1. I can be in my line command later when I'm doing proposed work, and I can hit this DP, and it drew me a 1 to 4 slope and took into account the fact that the y-axis is exaggerated by 2. So lots of good tools. Most of this is very intuitive. You can figure out mainly what's happening here, but they all work about the same way as this one. This is definitely by far the most common one that I use, though.
So that would be easy to do the features and everything you need in the cross section. So how the program know that is the design?
Knows what?
Those lines. How can you tell the program that is the design?
Oh, the design, right. I was showing these tools, and that's more so you can touch up the cross section. So you can manually draft the proposed if you like using these tools. But we actually have other tools that we're going to process proposed cross sections first before we do any manual drafting. And the way that's going to work is it's going to give us, like they always say, it'll give you 80% of what you need, then you go in and manually just clean it up. And that was very nice that we could do that in a way, because getting the first 80% of the cross sections is set up is very easy. It's like that last 20% of all these unique situations that's very difficult. And it's possible to automate the whole thing. So you don't do any drafting, zero drafting. But it would probably take you longer to do the last 20% to automate it than it would to just go drafting. So I'll show you the process that we normally use. And this varies maybe from designer to designer. Now, Mike Whitling, he's used this a long time. He used to actually write his own criteria. He knows Geopak very well. And so he might go ahead and automate this maybe a little bit further even that I tend to do. And I used to write criteria also. I can do that. I still think ever since active chain control came out, that I can still finish a job quicker probably doing the last 20% manually with active chain control. But it varies, and you'll see what I'm talking about here shortly. But a reason of concern for people of going to modeling is that there's no drafting of cross sections in modeling. Anything you want to tweak, you tweak the model. You're always working on the model. And at first I was really concerned about that. I'm starting to feel a little less concerned now because I went to that Bentley Learn conference in August, and I saw some demonstrations of other ways of adding to the model. Now, I shouldn't get too far off track, but you use something called templates and use a couple different types of templates to get these terrain models. Use templates within these corridors. But I found other ways of creating kind of somewhat manual drafting of 3D, although you don't actually draw anything in 3D. It's all in 2D, but it has the intelligence of 3D, and in a third view, you watch everything being drawn. And I need to spend more time with it, and I could say for sure in another month, but I think it's going to work out just fine for us. I think it makes a lot of sense to complete that model fully so we can give the whole model to construction. They can whip out their tablets, spin that model around anywhere, get any information anywhere on the model. So in the long term, I think it's going to be best to operate that way. But going back to this, in these legacy tools, we do kind of a combination of automation and drafting with the assistance of these tools, I would say. Okay, so we were using Navigator. I've got these VCR buttons. I can toggle through. I can see that that was the cross section at my box culvert. I am going to have to go back with existing and draft in that existing culvert. So I can kind of see what's happening here. So that's one way of viewing cross sections. The other way, go back to active chain control, open up another window or two. How about if I open all four? Say window tile, and that way I can get 3 in here real nice. And I'm going to say window 2, make that cross sections, and then let's reference in a few files like our profile and alignment, design, topo. I think I already had my geolines file. Okay, so window 1, maybe I say that, and I can switch these around. For now, I'll say, okay, there's my plan view. Window 2, make that cross sections. Window 4, profile. Let's see. Yeah, see how it, as I move around, I know exactly where I'm at. So let's say, and I just want to give you a quick example, show you what this does. Let's say I wanted to draw that edge of pavement right there. We're going to automate this, but I just quickly want to show you the value of this active chain control. So I could switch to like an intersection snap. Come over here, and remember we said in our cross section it already knows the elevation. So I'm going to lock the offset. I'm going to lock in elevation anyway. Hit apply. And then, let's see, let's do the, where's my lock snap? Well, a couple ways we can do, I'll just do this quick. Really. I was wanting to draw a line straight down. I could turn on AccuDraw or my angle lock, or several different ways that allows me to draw a line straight down. So I kind of chose a random elevation there, but you saw the most important thing I guess I'm getting at here is I was able to snap to where that edge of pavement is, and then I came back here and I didn't have to type anything in, and I just hit apply and it automatically drew to the exact correct offset. But before we get into any existing drafting of cross sections, we'll go ahead and kind of automate this process. Let me do a save settings, and let's go ahead and generate the existing cross sections for our side road. I'm just going to reference in that geolines file so I can pick up my pattern line level. Okay, so we'll just go back to Project Manager, existing ground cross sections. So in that dialog, I'm going to change that to the side road. In my pattern lines, I'm going to reset. I'm still pointing to that same design file, but this time I want to match up with the side road pattern lines. Switch this back to the 2:1. And I think we're good to go. Otherwise, we hit Add and Draw. So now we have existing cross sections for the side road. Yeah, for this one, instead of Navigator, I'll just show you that we can toggle through. The way Active Chain Control works with toggling through these cross sections is right-click on the window to sync it up, and then I get these buttons instead of that Navigator button. So here, again, kind of like VCR type play buttons. I can visualize those. I can also, of course, add in my topo and design, just like I did in the other file. So I can open up another window. Window tile quickly sets me up. Right-click the plan. Right-click for cross sections. And let me show you another way. Instead of using these buttons here, I'll show you. This is really nice here. If you have your plan view up, instead you can hit this middle button here. And so wherever my cursor goes, it'll take me right to that cross section without, toggling through. So I can, yeah. So, I can snap, and then I know that I'm on that cross section. Or I come up here, see, I'm on that cross section. So that really will come in handy for you. Okay, let me pause this recording. I'm getting tired of talking. I'm not used to talking this much all day.
Control Alt.
I just need a 5-minute break.